Welcome back to another video, where we dig through the forgotten corners of history to unearth the stories that were never meant to see the light of day. Tonight, we travel back to 1850, back to the rolling, sun-scorched hills of southern Alabama, where a single name was once enough to make grown men lower their voices to a whisper. The name Ellison. This was the antebellum South, an era draped in white cotton and darker sins, where fortunes rose on the broken backs of enslaved people, and families like the Ellisons stood at the very pinnacle of that brutal society, respected, admired, envied. But wealth, as it turns out, offers no shelter from what is coming for you. Their story, passed down in hushed fragments across generations, stands as a chilling reminder that some forces simply do not care how much land you own or how grand your columns are. And the mystery at its heart, it has never been solved, not truly, not fully. So settle in, because what follows has haunted this region for over a century and a half. And it isn't done haunting yet. Oh, too. The Ellison plantation rose proudly from the earth, surrounded by acres upon acres of cotton fields that seemed to stretch all the way to forever. The main house, a grand two-story structure of white columns and dark mahogany, had been built by hands that belonged to people who would never own a single inch of it. Locals called it Magnolia Hill, and the name fit. It sat on the highest point of the property, giving patriarch Josiah Ellison an unobstructed view of everything he had clawed his way into owning. Ornate iron gates marked the entrance to a long, oak-lined drive, the ancient trees forming a natural archway that felt more like a corridor into another world than a path to someone's home. Josiah had arrived in Alabama in 1825 with very little, some ambition, a modest inheritance, and 3 enslaved people he had inherited, a man named Moses, his wife Ruth, and their teenage son Samuel. He started with 50 acres. He worked the land himself in those early years, his hands growing as calloused as the people beside him. He was relentless, shrewd, and quietly feared by those he outmaneuvered in land deals and cotton trades. A decade later, he had transformed himself into one of the region's most powerful planters. 500 acres, nearly 40 enslaved people. And by 1838, that magnificent plantation house, a monument to his own ambition, stood complete on the hill. Josiah married Elizabeth Montgomery in 1830, 20 years his junior, the daughter of a neighboring planter who recognized in Josiah a man on the rise. Elizabeth was quietly stunning, amber eyes that always seemed to be holding something back, pale blonde hair arranged in elaborate southern fashions. She carried herself with a gentle grace that concealed, as it would turn out, depths that no one around her fully understood. She brought with her a substantial dowry: 10 house slaves, family heirlooms reaching back to the early Virginia colony, and one item in particular that never seemed to stray far from her hands: a silver mirror, its handle wrought in the shape of intertwined vines, bearing the Montgomery family crest. The house slaves were made uneasy by the way Elizabeth looked into it, not the casual glance of a woman checking her appearance. Something far more intent than that. Something searching. Together, Josiah and Elizabeth had 5 children: Thomas Borgerit in 1834, Catherine in 1836, Josephine in 1838, and little Sarah, born in 1844, a surprise after years that had led many to believe Elizabeth's family was complete. Each birth was celebrated lavishly, each child christened with ceremony and pride, and as the family grew, the Ellison name grew with it, until it became nearly synonymous with prosperity throughout southern Alabama. They were, on the surface, everything their world admired. Generous in drought years, charitable during illness outbreaks, legendary for their seasonal balls. The Christmas celebration of 1846 was still being talked about years later. the plantation house glowing with candlelight, the banquet table groaning under roast turkey and glazed ham and sweet potato pies, all of it prepared by Ruth, who had been with the family since the very beginning. Every Sunday they rode to St. James Episcopal Church in a polished carriage drawn by 4 matched bay horses, the whole family dressed in their finest, Josiah serving on the vestry, Elizabeth teaching Sunday school, their presence in the front pew a quiet declaration of their standing. On the surface, they were untouchable. Blessed, a family kissed by God and fortune alike. But beneath that beautiful surface, something was already stirring. Something dark. Something patient. Some people said it began with the land itself. That old timers had warned against purchasing it, and Josiah hadn't listened. Others pointed to Elizabeth's peculiar habits, those midnight wanderings across the plantation grounds, those books that no proper Southern lady was supposed to be reading. And nearly everyone who spent time at Magnolia Hill eventually noticed the oak tree, a massive, ancient thing standing at the eastern edge of the property, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like arms raised in supplication. The house slaves had their theories, shared in careful whispers after dark. Bessie, Elizabeth's personal maid, claimed she had seen her mistress beneath that oak on moonlit nights, speaking words in a language that had no name Bessie could put to it. Moses, elderly now but still tending the gardens, swore that flowers planted near the tree grew wrong. Too large, too vibrant, perfumed with a sweetness that gave you headaches and filled your sleep with strange, unsettling dreams. Samuel, Thomas's valet, once made the mistake of reporting that he had seen pale figures moving through the branches. He was whipped for his trouble, but the family gave no indication they heard any of it. Life on Magnolia Hill continued in its ordered rhythm. Seasons, harvests, balls, the measured milestones of growing children, until the summer of 1845, when everything began to break. In antebellum Southern society, a girl's 16th year meant everything. It marked the formal transition from childhood into womanhood, the moment she would be presented to society, and the delicate process of securing a suitable husband would begin. For the daughter of a man like Josiah Ellison, this was a milestone of enormous consequence. Margaret Ellison was approaching that milestone, and she was extraordinary. She had chestnut hair that fell in natural waves, her father's determined gray eyes, and a mind that refused to stay where it was put. While other girls her age concerned themselves with needlework and music, Margaret devoured her father's library. Histories, philosophical treatises, medical texts that were considered wildly improper for a young woman of her station. Her governess, Miss Abigail Porter, a practical, quietly perceptive woman from Boston, recognized something rare in Margaret and nurtured it, sometimes against Elizabeth's wishes. She will never find a husband. Elizabeth once complained to Josiah after a particularly awkward dinner. If she insists on discussing Voltaire at the table, Josiah had simply replied, "I'd rather have a daughter with thoughts in her head than one who can only simper and pour tea." But in the weeks leading up to her birthday, Margaret had grown strange, withdrawn. She spent long hours alone, wandering the gardens, drifting always, those who watched her noticed, toward the old oak tree at the edge of the property. Her brother Thomas, home from university, told their father that Margaret seemed somehow diminished, as if part of her had already gone somewhere he couldn't follow. Miss Porter's journal, discovered decades later in a relative's attic, its pages yellowed but still legible, reveals what Margaret had confided during those final weeks. On June 12, 1845, the governess wrote, Margaret confided in me today about her dreams. She speaks of a woman with hollow eyes who calls her by name. The figure appears each night, always standing beneath the old oak tree at the eastern boundary. Margaret describes her wearing a white dress of an older fashion, her hair loose about her shoulders. The woman never speaks, yet Margaret insists she can hear her voice in her mind, calling her daughter and promising to bring her home. A week later, the dreams had worsened. Multiple women now, all in white, all hollow-eyed. They sang to her, Margaret said, a melody without words that clung to her even after she woke. She hummed it for her governess once. Miss Porter wrote that the hairs on her arms stood straight up. When the governess suggested Margaret speak to her mother about it, Margaret went cold in a way that frightened her. "Mother already knows," she said, in a voice that barely sounded like her own. "She's always known they would come for me." Miss Porter brought her concerns to Josiah. He dismissed them entirely. "More fresh air," he said. "Less time with books. Focus on practical matters." And when the governess tried to press further, he cut her off. "Miss Porter," he said, "I implore you to educate my daughter, not to interpret her nightmares." Miss Porter's final journal entry from that period reads, "I fear there is more happening in this house than anyone is willing to acknowledge." The morning of Margaret's 16th birthday, July 15th, 1845, broke clear and sweltering. The plantation hummed with preparation. In the kitchen, Ruth supervised the cooking of Margaret's favorites. In the ballroom, chandeliers were cleaned and fitted with fresh candles. Garlands of magnolia and jasmine wound up the staircase. A string quartet had been brought in from Mobile. 57 guests had confirmed attendance, including the governor's secretary and his wife. The house was alive with movement, with anticipation, with the particular electricity of a celebration being carefully assembled. Margaret spent the early morning in her room, writing letters in a morning dress of pale blue muslin. Her lady's maid, Delia, would later remember that she had been calm, but distant. That she had stared into her reflection for long, unnerving stretches of time. That her responses to questions had been reduced to single words. She received her birthday gifts with polite gratitude. A leather journal from her mother, a silver locket from her brother, Shakespeare's sonnets from her sisters, a collection of poetry from Miss Porter. Those who knew her best noticed that the light behind her eyes when she opened each gift was simply absent. At midday, as the July sun pressed down on the plantation like a physical weight, Margaret asked to walk in the gardens. A few moments of solitude before the guests arrived. The request was unusual. Elizabeth, distracted by a minor household crisis, agreed without much thought and sent Bessie to keep a quiet eye from a distance. "Make sure she doesn't stay out long enough to spoil her complexion." Bessie followed at a respectful distance as Margaret moved through the formal gardens. The rose beds, the foxgloves, the small marble fountain at the center, where a cherub poured water endlessly into a basin. Margaret trailed her fingers through the water without stopping. She kept walking. Bessie, who had raised 5 children of her own before they were taken from her and sold to other plantations, recognized the deliberate quality in Margaret's seemingly aimless movement. The girl was making her way toward the oak tree, slowly, by a winding route that might not have been obvious to a less careful observer. Bessie moved to follow more closely, but a chicken, one of the cook's prized birds, had escaped its enclosure and was scratching at the dirt near the garden shed. Bessie turned to chase it back. It took only moments. The bird was cooperative. The whole detour lasted less than a minute. But when Bessie turned back, the meadow was empty. Margaret, in her pale blue dress, had vanished. Bessie called out. She hurried forward, scanning the tall grass. The meadow was barely 50 yards across before it met the tree line. A person standing should have been clearly visible. But there was nothing, no movement, no flash of pale blue fabric, no answer to her voice. Margaret Ellison was simply gone. At first, no one believed it was serious. Elizabeth, when Bessie returned breathless and wide-eyed, sighed like a mother whose plans were being disrupted by a willful child. "She's probably in the spring house," she said, adjusting a flower arrangement. "Or at the stables. She's always had a fondness for that new mare." A kitchen boy was sent to check. The matter surely would be resolved in minutes. But the kitchen boy found nothing. Thomas and 2 house slaves searched the grounds. The spring house, the smoke house, the stables, even the slave quarters, though it was unthinkable that Margaret would have gone there, nothing. No trace, no sign. As the first carriages began appearing on the long oak-lined drive, panic began to set in. Josiah paced the veranda, his voice tight. She must be found before the guests arrive. But the guests arrived, and there was still no Margaret. Elizabeth greeted early arrivals with brittle composure, deflecting questions with vague references to Margaret resting. Meanwhile, Josiah organized the male servants into search parties. As the sun tilted toward the horizon, it became impossible to pretend any longer. Josiah made the difficult announcement. His daughter had taken suddenly ill. The celebration would need to be postponed. The guests departed with murmurs of sympathy. And then the real search began. Slaves were roused from their quarters, torches lit, neighboring planters sending their own people to help. Lanterns moved across the plantation through the night like slow, floating stars. Men called Margaret's name until their voices gave out, the sound swallowed by the dark trees. Bloodhounds brought in from the Crawford plantation, 5 miles east, circled the area where she had last been seen. And then stopped, confused, unable to establish any trail leading away. By midnight, exhaustion and something heavier had settled over the searchers. Could she have been taken? Could she have run? Neither explanation held. She had taken nothing with her, not even a shawl. At dawn on July 16th, Samuel, Thomas's valet, who had kept searching long after others had rested, found the only clue the world would ever offer. A single white satin slipper, pearl button closure. Part of the new pair Elizabeth had commissioned specially for her daughter's birthday. It lay on its side at the base of the old oak tree, set precisely where Margaret's dreams had always placed the women in white. Its pristine fabric was unstained. The ground around it was soaked with heavy overnight dew. Every blade of grass, every fallen leaf glistening with moisture. The slipper was completely dry. Josiah arrived moments after Samuel's call, disheveled from the night, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. When he saw it, he fell to his knees. He reached toward it and stopped, as though afraid it might dissolve at his touch. As though it existed in some fragile state between this world and somewhere else entirely. When he finally lifted it, handling it like a relic, he noted that it was warm. Warm, as though it had just been removed from a living foot. "This isn't natural," whispered one of the slave women nearby. The overseer silenced her with a look, but her words had given voice to what everyone standing there already felt in their bones. Josiah Ellison spared nothing in the search for his daughter. Private investigators, newspaper notices in papers across Alabama and neighboring states. Strangers questioned at every county line. By August, with no sign of Margaret, he consulted a Cherokee tracker with a reputation for finding the unfindable, and paid him an extravagant sum. The tracker spent a full day in quiet study of the site around the oak tree. At sunset, he returned the gold coins. "This is not a matter for my skills," he said. "Your daughter walks paths I cannot follow." By September, Josiah had abandoned conventional methods entirely. Despite his position as a church vestryman, despite every instinct that should have stopped him, he began seeking those who claimed connections to the unseen world. A conjure woman known as Mother Surreal was brought in under cover of darkness. She muttered incantations, worked with herbs and bones, and offered only cryptic warnings about his women who wait beyond the veil. In October, at Elizabeth's insistence, a Creole spiritualist from New Orleans, Madame Lavo, came to Magnolia Hill. The séance was held in the formal parlor, with only the immediate family present. It ended abruptly when Madame Lavo began speaking in a voice not her own. A high, childlike voice that made Elizabeth press a fist to her mouth. The voice said, "The women in white have welcomed me home. Do not seek what is freely given." Then the medium collapsed. Upon reviving, she claimed no memory of having spoken at all. To life on the plantation settled into a grief-weighted rhythm. Josiah traveled as far as New York and Boston chasing rumors, returning each time hollower than before. The search was officially abandoned by the summer of 1847. A memorial service was held, though Elizabeth insisted that a place still be set for Margaret at the dinner table every single night. She might come home hungry, Elizabeth would say, her gaze fixed on some point in the distance that only she could see. And then, as July approached, the household was forced to confront a new and terrible reality. Catherine's 16th birthday was coming. Catherine Ellison had always been the practical one. Steadier than Margaret, less given to imagination and reverie. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's direct, unflinching gaze. In the 2 years since Margaret had vanished, Catherine had quietly absorbed the weight of the household, managing domestic affairs, caring for her younger siblings, holding the family's daily life together while her mother fragmented and her father became obsessed. She showed none of Margaret's warning signs, no haunted look, no unexplained withdrawal, no dreams of women in white. "I sleep soundly," she told Miss Porter when gently asked. "I have no time for nightmares. I don't put stock in coincidences or curses." And then, quietly, "Margaret's disappearance was a tragedy, but it won't happen to me. Father has hired extra men. I have no intention of wandering off alone." Josiah had taken every precaution imaginable. Armed men patrolled the property day and night. The oak tree, that terrible, ancient, impossible tree, had been cut down, its wood burned to ash, despite the warnings of older slaves who said disturbing it would only make things worse. Catherine was never left alone. Not for a moment. A companion slept in her room. On the morning of October 3, 1847, Catherine's birthday, the house held its breath. The day passed quietly. No disturbances, no dreams. Catherine received her gifts, shared cake with her family, and retired early. Everyone allowed themselves, cautiously, to exhale. It was just before dawn when the screaming started. Catherine's companion, her cousin Harriet, who had come to stay with the family after Margaret's disappearance, woke to find the bed beside her empty. She raised the alarm. The household erupted. Catherine's nightgown was laid out neatly on the bed, as if she had simply stepped out of it. The window was closed and latched. From the inside, the door was locked, the key still in the keyhole on the interior side of the room. No one had entered. No one had left. The bloodhounds could find no scent trail beyond Catherine's room. She was gone. Impossible, but gone. 2. The second disappearance shattered something essential in Josiah Ellison. He stopped speaking of finding his daughters. Instead, he became consumed by a single, desperate purpose protecting who remained. Josephine, 14. Sarah, barely 3. Both were moved into the master bedroom. The plantation began its slow, terrible decline. Iron bars were installed on every window. Chains of locks were added to every door. No one entered or left without Josiah's explicit permission. He stopped sleeping. He stopped trusting. Elizabeth retreated further from reality. She spoke to her missing daughters as though they were in the room with her. Set places for them at meals, folded their laundry, arranged fresh flowers in their empty bedrooms. Miss Porter's journal from this period is devastating to read. As I fear for my sanity in this house. Last night I dreamt I saw Catherine walking across the cotton fields, her white nightgown billowing though there was no wind. When she turned to look at me, her face was that of an old woman, her eyes dark pits. Behind her walked Margaret, and behind Margaret, a procession of women I did not recognize. All in white, all hollow-eyed, all singing something I could not quite hear. Mrs. Ellison merely looked at me and said, "You've seen them too, then. God help us all. See too, by 1849, the once glorious Ellison plantation was in ruins. Slaves had been sold off to cover mounting debts. The fields had failed 2 years in succession. Remaining servants whispered that the land itself had turned hostile, that nothing would grow until the family was gone. And still, with the indifferent cruelty of time, Josephine's 16th birthday drew closer. Josephine had been 12 when Margaret vanished, 14 when Catherine followed. She had watched both disappearances from close enough to understand, in the marrow of her bones, what was coming. By April 1849, she was a solemn young woman who rarely smiled and never left the house. She had not surrendered to hope or denial. She had simply accepted. She came to Miss Porter's room one night in February and made her request quietly, without drama. "Take Sarah away before April comes," she said. "They won't stop with me. They'll take Sarah too when her time comes, but you can save her. Take her north, change her name, never speak of the Ellisons again." When Miss Porter asked who they were, Josephine looked at her the way someone looks at a person who has not been paying attention. "The women in white," she said. "The ones who were here before us. The ones we displaced." Desutu, as April approached, Josiah's preparations grew almost frantic in their desperation. He dismissed the remaining house staff. He boarded up every entrance save one, which he guarded himself, rifle in hand. He consulted engineers about an underground chamber. But there was no money left, nothing left to build with. And then Elizabeth, in a rare moment of startling clarity, said what she had perhaps known for years. "We should leave, go north, change our names and start somewhere new, somewhere this shadow cannot follow us." For the first time in 4 years, Josiah listened. On the eve of Josephine's birthday, April 22nd, 1849, Josephine asked to speak with her father alone. No one ever recorded what passed between them. But when Josiah emerged from her room, he looked like a man who had just been told the shape of something he had been refusing to see. He summoned the remaining staff and gave the order, "Pack what you need. The family leaves at first light." They were going to Mobile, then Boston, to Josiah's brother. For the first time in years, something that resembled hope moved through the house. Miss Porter helped Elizabeth pack the essentials. Josephine moved calmly through the rooms, choosing keepsakes with quiet practicality. "Only what we need," she reminded her mother. "We can buy new things in Boston." Little Sarah, 5 years old and beautifully unaware of the terror that had consumed her family's entire world, clapped her hands and asked if they were going on an adventure. As the first pale light gathered on the eastern horizon, the family assembled in the entrance hall. Josiah counted heads. Elizabeth, Josephine, Sarah, Miss Porter. And then, "Where is Thomas?" Thomas had gone to ready the horses. He should have returned. He had not. Josiah stepped onto the porch and called his son's name into the pre-dawn stillness. No answer came. The carriage stood ready. The horses were not hitched. "Stay here," Josiah said. "Bar the door behind me." And then he walked into the gray morning light and disappeared from the story. The four women inside barred the door and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two. The sun rose and sent its pale light through the cracks in the boarded windows, striping the entrance hall in gold and shadow. And then Sarah said, softly, that she could hear something. A humming, low and melodic, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Josephine lifted her head, listened, and smiled. A smile so knowing, so ancient on a young woman's face, that Miss Porter felt the air leave her lungs. "They're here," Josephine said simply. She crossed to the front door. She lifted the bar. She stepped outside. Miss Porter lunged and caught her wrist, but Josephine turned, and the look on her face stopped the governess cold. Not fear, not sorrow. An absolute, unshakable peace. "It's all right," Josephine said. "This is how it must be. Look after Sarah. Remember your promise." She pulled free and walked down the porch steps into the morning light. Elizabeth screamed and rushed to the doorway. She beat against something invisible at the threshold with her fists, something that held her back while letting Miss Porter pass through unchanged. And Miss Porter saw. Across the overgrown lawn, 7 women in white stood in a semicircle. Their forms wavered at the edges, like light on summer pavement, not quite solid, not quite real. Among them, she would swear to this for the rest of her life, were Margaret and Catherine, their expressions serene, their hands extended toward their younger sister. Josephine walked toward them without a moment's hesitation. As she reached them, the women parted, and there, at the center of the circle, was the oak stump. Charred, supposedly dead, now impossibly sprouting new growth, a slender green sapling rising from the ash. Josephine knelt before it. She placed her hands on the fresh young shoots, and between one heartbeat and the next, all 8 women were gone. The lawn was empty. The saplings stood where they had been, and as Miss Porter watched, barely breathing, it grew. In the space of seconds, it stretched upward, its branches spreading wide toward the morning sky, already the size of a tree that should have taken decades to become what it was. No trace of Josiah or Thomas Ellison was ever found. Elizabeth took Sarah and Miss Porter and fled to her family in Virginia. She never spoke of the Ellisons again. When asked, she said only that her husband and elder children had died of fever. Sarah grew up as Sarah Montgomery, raised by her maternal grandparents as though she had always been one of them. Elizabeth died in 1855. She had never recovered. Not truly. Not in any way that counted. Miss Porter stayed with the family until Sarah was grown. In 1860, as the country lurched toward war, she sealed her journals in a cedar box with instructions that they not be opened until after her death. The box sat untouched for decades. It was discovered in 1902 during renovations to the old Montgomery house in Richmond. By then, both Miss Porter and Sarah were long dead. Sarah had died in 1870. Of tuberculosis, the physician said. She was 26 years old. She died on her birthday, and according to the attending doctor's notes, in her final moments, she had turned toward the window and smiled. She said clearly, "They've come for me at last. My sisters have waited so long." After the war, the Ellison land was divided and sold. The house, what remained of it, was torn down in 1867. Only the oak tree was left standing, grown now to an impressive and inexplicable size. Local legend held that on certain nights, particularly in the spring and summer months, when the Ellison daughters had each been born, the tree would be surrounded by flickering lights, as though invisible hands carried lanterns through the darkness. Those brave or reckless enough to approach reported hearing women's voices singing and feeling something they struggled to name, a profound peace threaded through with a deep and ancient grief. In 1897, A historian from the University of Alabama named Dr. William Harcourt came across references to the disappearances in old newspaper archives and began to investigate. He spent months interviewing elderly residents, combing through property records, tracking the history of the land back further than anyone had previously looked. What he found suggested that the Ellison tragedy had older roots than anyone had imagined. The land where Josiah had built his plantation had previously been a burial ground, not for any local tribe, as some had speculated, but for an obscure religious sect that had settled briefly in the area in the late 1700s before vanishing under circumstances that no one had ever adequately explained. The group had been led primarily by women under the guidance of a woman called Mother Abigail, who claimed to receive visions from what she called the women beyond the veil. They had blended elements of Christianity with much older traditions, and when accusations of witchcraft brought a mob to their compound in the spring of 1798, the mob found the buildings empty. Every woman in the sect had vanished without trace. The only living thing remaining was a massive oak tree at the center of their settlement, its bark carved with symbols no one could identify. The mob had tried to cut it down. Every axe that struck it broke. Eventually, they gave up and stayed away, until Josiah Ellison arrived from Virginia, unaware of any of it, and purchased the land. Dr. Harcourt's research took a deeply personal turn when he discovered that his own great-grandmother had been a member of Mother Abigail's sect. Among family papers, he found a letter written just before the group's disappearance. We go to join those who came before, beyond the veil where time flows differently. The tree is our anchor and our gateway. Through it we will return when needed, to reclaim what is ours, and to welcome our scattered daughters home. They will know us by the calling in their blood, by the dreams that come as their 16th year approaches. None can stop what has been set in motion. We are patient. We can wait. Harcourt published his findings in a small academic journal in 1899. His colleagues dismissed them immediately, embarrassed and discouraged, but unable to let it go. He made one final visit to the property in the summer of 1900. He set up camp beneath the oak tree. He planned to spend the night and record whatever he found. The final entry in his journal read midnight. The humming has begun, just as the locals described. There is a quality to it that defies description. Not quite music, not quite language, but something existing between the two. The air around the tree seems to shimmer, as though the boundary between this world and another has grown unbearably thin. I can make out figures moving among the branches. Women in white, their faces both young and impossibly ancient at once. Whereas one of them is beckoning to me. Could it be Mother Abigail herself? I should be afraid. I am not. I feel only curiosity and a strange, overwhelming sense of homecoming, as though I have been expected here for a very long time. I am going to approach them. God forgive me if this is madness, but I must know the truth. Dr. Harcourt was never seen again. 2. The oak tree still stands today, protected as a historical landmark, though very few people who visit it know the true reason for its preservation. The fence and warning signs that surround it are no real deterrent to those who feel compelled to come. And they still come. Paranormal investigators, grieving people, curious teenagers on dares, researchers who have read the old accounts and need to see it for themselves. Not all of them leave. The disappearances are spread thin across the decades. A college student in 1972, a paranormal researcher in 1984, a young mother in 1991, a retired history teacher in 2003, sporadic enough that no clear pattern demands official attention. Most are quietly classified as voluntary disappearances, people who chose to walk away from their lives for reasons of their own. Perhaps that is even true. Perhaps every single one of them had a perfectly rational explanation. Perhaps the Ellison story is nothing more than a series of tragedies stitched together across time into something that feels like meaning. But then explain the dreams that still visit girls in 3 surrounding counties as they approach their 16th birthdays. Vivid, magnetic, deeply felt, of women calling them by name, reaching out from beneath a vast oak tree, offering something that feels like belonging, like homecoming, like being finally, completely known. Parents in those counties have been known to send their daughters away to relatives in other states until the dangerous birthday has passed. Explain the oak tree itself, the one that experts have repeatedly examined, core, sampled, studied, and walked away from shaking their heads. Its rings suggest an age of barely 150 years. Its size indicates a tree that should be at least 500 years old. And explain the objects sometimes found at its base, appearing and vanishing with no discernible logic. A white satin slipper with a pearl button closure, perfectly preserved. A silver locket containing a portrait of a young woman with chestnut hair. A leather-bound journal, blank except for one line on the first page, written in ink so old it should have crumbled to dust centuries ago. Before they are calling me home, in 2015, a paranormal investigation team spent 3 nights near the oak tree with the latest available equipment. They recorded unexplained temperature drops, audio that seemed to capture women's voices, singing in a language no one could identify, infrared footage of what appeared to be human figures moving through the branches. On the 3rd night, the team's only female member, a technical expert and committed skeptic named Jordan, walked toward the tree. The cameras followed her. Her expression shifted, and the team watched as something changed behind her eyes. "They're talking to me," she whispered. "They're saying I belong with them, that I always have." Her colleagues physically pulled her back. She returned to herself, and later had no memory of what had happened. She resigned from the show shortly afterward. Her social media went quiet. Attempts by fans to reach her were unsuccessful. Her family, when contacted, said only that Jordan had found her path and wished to be left in peace. The show's producers said they'd lost touch with her after she left, and so it endures. Neither solved nor debunked. Neither fully here nor fully gone. A shadow of a story that hovers at the edge of what we allow ourselves to believe. The oak tree still grows. Its roots reach deep into soil, nourished by secrets older than anyone walking this earth can name. The women in white still move through its branches on moonlit nights, still hum their strange and borderless melody, still wait, with a patience that has nothing human in it, for the next daughter who will feel the pull, hear the call, and finally understand that she has always been theirs. Some hungers transcend time. Some stories, once begun, have no true ending. Only a continuing, a slow unfolding, a becoming that we can witness from the outside, but never fully comprehend. So if you find yourself in southern Alabama someday, if curiosity, or something older than curiosity, draws you toward a massive oak tree standing alone amid protected acres, remember Margaret Ellison. Remember Catherine. Remember Josephine. Remember Eleanor Pritchard and Howard Daniels, and every name that has been quietly filed away under unsolved in some county office. Listen for the humming. Watch for the women in white. And ask yourself this honestly: are you certain you know who is calling you home? 2. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, remember that some mysteries are best admired from a safe distance. Some calls are best left unanswered. And some invitations, once accepted, can never be rescinded. Somewhere in Alabama, beneath an oak that should not exist, the women in white are still waiting. They have all the time in the world.